Tanks, east.
Welcome to today's introduction to the gunner's position on the Challenger 2 model in Steelbeast. If you haven't already seen it, please watch our other video on the commander's position. It contains information that may make understanding this position easier. As already said in our companion video, the Challenger 2 was a fairly conventional tank in many ways, fairly typical for a tank built in the late 80s and early 1990s. The only outwardly noteworthy thing about it is a thermal observation and gunnery sight, otherwise known as TOGS, on the gun barrel. This goes back to Challenger 1. It had TOGS mounted on the right side of the turret, and there were problems aligning the gun, the thermal imaging sight head, and the laser rangefinder. Mounting the TOGS on the gun replaced this old problem with a few fresh ones. However, the most significant difference between Challenger 2 and its contemporaries is its rifle gun. In the 1980s, the 105mm tank guns were gradually losing their competitive advantage to new Soviet tank designs. A replacement was needed across NATO. Most tanks switched to the 120mm smoothbore cannon of German origin. The British went a different way. The Royal Ordnance developed the L30, an evolution of the L11 gun as fitted to Chieftain and Challenger 1. The L30 allowed the British to continue to utilise their large stockpile of Hesh ammunition. Hesh rounds only work at impact velocities between 300 and 700 metres a second, so they have to be designed to fly slowly. Because Hesh is slow, it needs rifling for spin stabilisation in flight. However, unlike the L11, the L30 was made with electro-slag refined steel and chromium lined to allow larger bag charges to be used with a new generation of armour-piercing, fin-stabilised, discarding sabot rounds. Before we discuss the gunner's position, perhaps we should first mention something it is necessary to understand about the Challenger 2 fire control system, since it performs differently depending on whether you are in the gunner's primary sight or TOGS. The most important thing to realise is the fire control system on the Challenger 2 automatically induces lead. You lead a moving target by aiming at the point where it will be in a second or two after you fire the gun, accounting for the time of flight of the projectile. More on this topic in a few moments. Lead is being applied in two different ways depending on which sight you use. The fire control system on the Challenger 2 is probably best compared to that of the M1 Abrams. However, the primary sight head is stabilised on two axes compared to the one on the Abrams, which in turn is just like how the TOGS behaves. We shall come to that later. In the Challenger 2 model in Steelbeast, the gunner has three basic sights to make engagements. These are the gunner's primary sight, the thermal observation and gunnery sight, and the auxiliary sight. There is also the unity sight, which is used to view the combat area and a wider field of view than the other sights. But it is not really a combat sight, since it features no symbology. It's really of use only at extremely short ranges. Press F4 to enter the unity sight, and use the joystick or mouse to move the turret around normally. The gunner's unity sight is simply a vision block that allows the gunner to see an unmagnified view through a vision block. This is positioned on the centre roof behind the main gun. This sight can be useful if you need to see immediately to the front of the turret in a relatively wide field of view. This position isn't a lot of use in combat since you can't fire the main gun with any accuracy. That said, you could walk coax tracer fire onto target from this position if you found yourself swamped by lots of hostile and aggressive infantry at close range. Return to the primary view by pressing F2. The gunner's primary sight is used to engage and destroy targets, but both Sagem and Baron Strode incorporates a laser rangefinder that can detect ranges out to 9,995 meters plus or minus 5 meters. The primary sight is daylight only and mostly used when the thermal sight is damaged or to identify targets. If you are currently in the thermal sight view, you can switch to daylight view by pressing the plus key on the number pad. The zoom level in the day sight can be toggled with N and is independent of the magnification set in the thermal sight. In the primary sight, you will see a set of symbols in the bottom of the sight and a reticule in the centre of the sight. These are referred to as the gun sight symbology. The reticle is located in the centre to aim at a target. The centre of the reticle is in a dot surrounded by a circle. The centre dot is the aiming point for lasing and firing. In low magnification, a larger red circle appears around the centre reticle. This large circle shows what the field of view of the sight will be like when switched to high magnification. A set of numbers in the lower part of the sight is the range in meters that is currently entered in the fire control system. This range is either entered manually or automatically when the laser rangefinder is used. To the right of the range, last or first, denotes the laser rangefinder setting, either last or first return on the laser. To the left of the range is the currently loaded, last fired ammunition type, displayed as either Fin 1 for sabot rounds or Hesh for Hesh rounds. To the left of the ammo type is a letter, either G or C, denoting who has current control of the turret. We described how that works in our last video. Below that is a red ready to fire light, which lights up when the gun is ready to fire. Additionally, loading will appear to the right of the range when the main gun is being loaded. Additionally, the light at the bottom will go green when the gun is loaded. The L and the D illustrate two different range inputs into the fire control system. L will indicate a range inputted by the laser rangefinder. D indicates that a range has been inputted either manually or that the battle sight mode has been selected. The Challenger 2 laser rangefinder and weapon systems cannot be used when in either GPS or TOG's low magnification. You must select to high magnification to engage. You can see this by observing the text "Select High Mag" or "Select GPS High Mag" in the sight picture. If shown, then you must switch to high magnification to engage the target or use the laser rangefinder, at which point you will see the red ready to fire light if the gun is loaded and in coincidence with a gun sight. Once the target is acquired, the gunner should switch to high magnification by pressing N and place the dot in the centre of the reticle on the target and laze by pressing Ctrl or joystick button 2. Once you laze the target and get the range, you could immediately fire at a stationary target. To eliminate the possible source of error, you may want to disable lead prediction entirely. Simply dump the lead by pressing P after you laze, or joystick button 3, or the middle mouse button, and then fire. A quick yank on the handle with an equally quick correction can do no harm in this case. However, if you or your target moves, lead must be applied. Once the target is lased with the sight in high magnification, and, if the target is moving, a steady track executed, the gun is ready to be fired. To fire the main gun, press spacebar or joystick button 1. The round will now be launched downrange, hopefully with fatal results. If by some chance you miss the target, you should cancel the ballistic computer's continuous lead calculations or dump in the lead by pressing P, joystick button 3 or the middle mouse button. Dumping lead essentially zeroes out the calculated lead and resets the sight to 0. If you do not dump lead, then turret movement may become sluggish as the fire control system attempts to calculate lead for all subsequent movements, including your rapid overcorrection in response to the dampened motion. It's exactly like it performs in the Abrams fire control system. The Gunner's Thermal Observation and Gunnery Site, or TOGS for short, is a site that is supplemental to the GPS and allows a user to observe and aim at night and in most poor visibility conditions. The TOGS is a separate sight picture which has its own unique behaviour. One difference in the GPS is that it's not stabilised on the horizontal plane. Therefore, when you laze the reticle, you must and will displace to counteract turret position adjustments. Therefore, when you laze, the reticle must and will displace to counteract turret position adjustments. Its behaviour is rather like that in the early variants of the M1 Abrams fire control system. To activate the TOGS, press plus on the number pad. In wide field of view, the reticle will display a set of brackets around the centre of the sight. These brackets show the narrower field of view if you were to switch to high magnification. The TOG's wide field of view is used to quickly scan the terrain, looking for any hot spots that may stand out in the view. Once a heat signature is spotted, press N to zoom in, switching the sight to high magnification. In high magnification, you can laze and engage a target. The TOG's high magnification view is excellent for engaging targets that may be partially obscured by vegetation or behind clouds of dust or conventional smoke screens. The thermal sight is also an extreme advantage over non-thermal sight equipped foes in low visibility conditions such as night, though it degrades with lots of water in the air, rain, snow or thick fog. The disadvantage of the thermal sight is that the target identification is more difficult, especially at ranges above 2 kilometers. The TOGS is mounted directly above the main gun tube. As the gun rises to apply ballistic super elevation, the aiming reticle drops to compensate. Maybe you already see the problem. Yes, with HESH loaded, long-range engagements may cause the reticle to move off the bottom of the TOG's sight picture while the gun tube obscures your target. This strange behaviour is normal for the Challenger 2. You fire, then reset the sight to observe the strike of the round and repeat if necessary. The TOG's aiming reticule is located in high magnification in the centre of the sight and is used for aiming at the target. The centre of the reticule is a circle with a dot in the middle of it. The centre dot is the aiming point for lasing and firing. The remainder of the symbology in the TOGS is identical to that of the GPS sight. Engaging targets with fin with the TOGS is somewhat different than how you would do the same in the GPS, but very similar to the M1 A1 Abrams. Acquire your target by switching to the TOG's high magnification view by pressing N and place the dot in the centre of the reticle on the target. Laze by pressing Ctrl or joystick button 2. Once you laze the target and get the range, lead begins to be calculated. Now the TOG's reticule will start to move in the sight to counteract turret and gun tube position adjustments. When a moving target is lased, the gun must jump ahead of the target in order to apply the appropriate lead. As the TOGS is mounted on the mantlet, it too jumps ahead of the target. The reticule compensates by moving in the opposite direction, seemingly lagging behind. The ballistic computer calculates lead depending on the range entered into the computer and the horizontal rate of traverse of the turret. Pretty much all ballistic computers build a moving average of turret movement rates or the input values directly from the gunner's handles. A pipeline of traverse rates is created and then averaged out to determine both lead angle and actual turret traverse. As new turret traverse data gets into the pipeline, the oldest values are being removed. If you were to move with near maximum velocity to the left and then equally fast to the right, the moving average would first continue predicting lead to the left even after you started moving to the right, though it would rapidly slow down, reach zero and build up momentum to the right as the sample data of a left turret traverse exit the pipeline and turret traverse to the right begins to dominate. This is in essence the underlying reason but experience a sluggish turret response. A good track of a target requires two things: that your turret traverse rate matches the angular velocity of the target, and that you keep the centre of your reticule on the centre of the target. If you can keep the reticule on target, your turret traverse rates will automatically be correct. It's just it requires some practice to achieve the needed eye-hand coordination. Track the target too slow, and the reticule will fall behind. If you fire with a bad track, then you are most likely going to shoot in front or behind the target. A quick yank of the control handle as a last second correction is not good practice. With a bad track, your tracking rate is either too fast or too slow in relation to the target's actual movement. Track the target too fast, and the reticule slowly moves in front of the target. Once the target is lased in high magnification, and if you have a good track, the gun is ready. Fire it with the spacebar or joystick button 1. The round will now be launched down range. If you missed, dump lead as discussed before. Press P, joystick button 3 or the middle mouse button. This works the same regardless of which sight you use. Once lead is dumped, put the reticule back on the target, track, laze and fire again. With HESH ammunition loaded, the trajectory of the round can be very steep even at moderate ranges. At long ranges, the TOG's reticule may drop below the bottom of the sight picture. Even if you can still see it and bring it on the target, your own gun tube may now obscure the view. In the Challenger, this is normal. If you think you can still hit, fire. Quickly enter battle sight range by pressing the backspace hotkey. The gun will now drop to a level elevation, allowing you to observe your own fire. You probably also want to dump lead in this situation, as lead will be induced once you index the battle sight range into the ballistic computer. Should you need to re-engage the target, place the reticule back on the target, laze, fire, change the battle sight and dump lead again, repeating as necessary. Sure, you can't track a moving target that way, but in cases where you can no longer adequately track a target because the required super elevation of the gun is so high, you shouldn't use HESH anyway. A steep trajectory makes it susceptible to ranging errors, and a long time of flight invite crosswind or unexpected changes in the target's movement to play tricks on you. Also, natural dispersion of HESH rounds is a bit bigger than that of fin rounds. In short, use HESH at long range only against stationary targets, and against moving targets only at ranges under 1,500 meters, and that's pushing it already. There may be instances when the gunner must manually index a range into the ballistic computer. This may be necessary if a target cannot be lased through a smoke screen and another target in the platoon has a good range on it, or the gunner wants to make an estimate, or the laser has been damaged. Fortunately, the procedure is the same whether you use the primary sight or the TOGs. In Steel Beast, use the row and number keys on the keyboard. Type in the range you want to enter in tens of meters. For a range of 2,500 meters, type in 250 and then press enter. The range now appears in the bottom of the sight picture. As you hit enter, lead calculation starts. The gunner's auxiliary sight is for circumstances, usually through battle damage, when the gunner's primary sight and the TOGs becomes inoperative. The auxiliary sight is a fixed ×8 magnification and is always aligned with a gun. If you need to check whether the gun tube is clear of obstructions, check with the gunner's auxiliary sight. To access it, press F3. The sight is a Vickers Instruments L30 telescope and is recessed in the mantlet to minimise the chance of damage. The method of engagement is a graticule, similar to that which you may have seen in simulations of World War II tanks. On the top right, you will notice a stadiometric graticule. use it to estimate a range to a target. It works pretty much the same in the M60, the Bradley, the BMP, or in Soviet-era tanks. Put the enemy vehicle on the grain level. If the upper level of the box coincides with the roof level, then that will give you an approximate range. With partially obscured targets, use only half of the height of the graticule curve. In the centre top section of the sight is the fin aiming reticule, which extends up to 2,400 meters. The upper part is used to aim at the target while using fin ammunition. Below this is the Hesh aiming reticules, which share some of the aim points with the fin scale above it at 400 meters. It extends below the fin scale down to 3,200 meters. The aiming reticules are the center line of circles, plus marks and dots, while the horizontal lines to the left and right are used when estimating lead on the moving target. Along the left side of the sight is the coaxial MG's markings. For a fin engagement, assuming we have no other option, we will first estimate the range using the stadia and apply the corresponding super elevation. Once the range is estimated to the target, elevate the gunner's auxiliary sight so that the appropriate range numbers to the side of the vertical scale are even with the target in the sight. Next, if the target is stationary, align the target with the centre of the sight marked with the dots and lines below the top middle circle and fire. This is pretty reliable actually, particularly against static targets. Against moving targets, use the dashed lines to the left and right of centre to estimate lead depending on the target speed. For slow moving targets, as a rule of thumb, aim for the tip of the hull in the direction of movement. Fast movers require more lead, obviously. With practice you'll develop your skills as a gunner. Hesh is not to be fired in reversionary mode against moving targets, since the chance of hitting the target are so small. Range estimation error, lead estimation error, the long time of flight, and the high dispersion of Hesh range simply conspire against you. There may of course be some occasions when it's necessary, but except at very short ranges, expect great frustration and disproportionate ammo consumption. As for engaging static targets, the situation is slightly better. Follow the same procedure, just remember to use the Hesh markings for super elevation. Most likely, your first round will still miss. Use line correction to improve your aim. Lay the gun on the target equal and opposite to the error of the previous round. So if the round falls to the left, you correct the gun an equal amount to the right. If the round falls short, you correct an equal amount up. Do this right, and the second or third round will hit out to at least medium distances, perhaps even further under favourable conditions such as a level firing position and low crosswind speeds. Lastly, and this is an important point to remember, before you move across to the gunner's auxiliary sight, please make sure the gunner's primary sight has the magnification mode selected as high. This is because a failsafe means the main armament cannot fire without the gunner's primary sight being set to a high magnification. Just because you now look through the auxiliary sight or the Unity sight doesn't mean the primary sight would automatically set itself to high magnification. If you don't set it, the main gun won't fire. Your only alternative at this point is to use the emergency fire button, which is Shift plus Spacebar in Steel Beast. We hope you found this introduction helpful. Thank you for watching.